This episode of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast is brought to you by Legacy Staffs, which are crafted by the Brazos Walking Stick Company in Waco, Texas. You can go to brazosticks.com and use the name Mac Payne, one word, at the checkout and get 10% off your next order of the Legacy Staff or cane of your own design.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Vietnam Veterans News Podcast. News of interest about Vietnam veterans from a Vietnam veteran. Now here's your host, Mac Payne.
This is Mac Payne here with episode 1827 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. News about the Vietnam War and the brave veterans who served there, as told to you by yours truly, a Vietnam veteran. Back in 1970, I was flying Cobra gunships with A Battery, 4th of the 77th Aerial Rocket Artillery with the 101st Airborne Division. We operated out of Phu Bai, which is way up north in I Corps. One day, something unusual happened at the refueling point that has fascinated me to this very day. I was in the process of refueling my aircraft after a hot mission out in the Ashaw Valley. Suddenly, out of the clear blue sky, a strange aircraft approached. It was a Huey helicopter with strange markings, blue on the top, light gray on the bottom. The pilots were dressed in classy gray pants, short-sleeved white shirts, and low-quarter shoes. Written on the tail boom of that helicopter was Air America. I was impressed. Within our sphere of knowledge at Phu Bai, there was only speculation as to what Air America was. That means no one really knew what it was. That status still endures to this day with most observers. My purpose on this podcast is to raise the shroud of ignorance that surrounds Air America. That effort started back in episode 1821, where former Air America pilot Bob Caron of Fort Walton Beach was featured. He is the one flying the helicopter in the iconic image of people trying to flee the murderous North Vietnamese who were closing in on them in Saigon back in 1975. That episode was followed up by episode number 1823, where more about Air America was featured. It seems the former Air America personnel are attempting to obtain federal pension benefits from a government that refuses to acknowledge their existence and the fact that they were government employees. This podcast is joining the crusade to get federal pension benefits for Air America personnel. A bill titled the Air America Act of 2020 has been introduced into the Senate by our own Senator Marco Rubio of Florida. You are encouraged to contact your senators and representatives and ask them to support the legislation. To give you a better understanding of the Air America situation, in this and the following few episodes, I will be sharing with you excerpts from a history of Air America. And then we're going to have a special guest on the podcast all the way from San Francisco, California. Maureen Ebersole is an attorney who is working with the Air America Association to get this legislation passed. She is going to make a special appearance on this podcast to give us an update on the situation. And now, without any further ado, let me start lifting the fog of ignorance from the Air America story. Dateline Air America website. I will be reading to you a piece titled Air America, a historical synopsis from the beginning to the end. The history of Air America is enigmatic and complex, not the least reason so because it has often been distorted. Authors of books and articles assume, imply, or assign CIA ownership because of the spy agency's romantic overtures and eye-catching appeal. But the truth is, the United States government owned Air America, not the CIA. There was, however, a CIA connection, and initially CIA personnel managed the company, though that did not last long. For the most part, the Air America complex was administered internally. Air America's president, Hugh Grundy, was not a CIA employee, but George Duell, the CEO of Air America from 1959 until 1971, worked for the CIA, overseeing various contracting companies that included Air America. It is unclear whether Duell was a staff employee or worked under a personal service agreement. Officially, the CIA says there is no record of him working for them. Duell died of cancer in 1985. He was a lifelong bachelor, and there was no obituary, flowers, or funeral. Ironically, although Grundy was married and had outside interest, he too requested no funeral. But Grundy and Duell died in virtual anonymity. Great effort was made to make the Air America appear as a private enterprise for plausible deniability. But all work was for the U.S. government, and when the complex company was dismantled and the assets sold, the U.S. Treasury received the profit. It should be noted that the flurry of reports concerning the diplomatic meetings and decisions dealing with civil air transport and CAT Inc. are exhaustive and contained in letters and historical notes referenced in the footnotes. The presentation here is a minuscule rendition of the actual history, and persons reading the references may arrive at different conclusions. The intent herein is to provide a basic understanding of a 30-year period when progressive elaboration was a daily occurrence. Air America began life in 1946 with a Chinese company named Civil Air Transport, owned by none other than General Claire Chennault and Whiting Willauer. Chennault was best known for his leadership of the Flying Tigers, supporting Chinese troops against Japanese encroachment into China before America's involvement in World War II. Willauer was a Princeton University and Harvard Law School graduate. Unsatisfied with practicing admiralty law and fostering an innate desire for adventure and wanderlust, Willauer found a way to go to China, team up with Chennault, and get involved with China's fledgling aviation transport industry after Japan surrendered. Chennault and Willauer did well in the late 1940s, hauling furs, tin, food, and practically anything else people needed to move from one place to another. Flying was treacherous, and with the absence of navigational aids, difficult at best. The pilots, World War II veterans, were experienced, spunky, and brave. CAT. The employees liked using the abbreviated term, sided with the Chinese Nationalist Party headed by Chiang Kai-shek when, in 1945, civil war broke out again between the Nationalist and the Chinese Communist Party, led by Mao Zedong. In 1949, the Nationalists fled China when they lost the war, and CAT helped them move to Formosa when Chiang Kai-shek ruled the Republic of China until his death in 1975. Once the Nationalists were finished moving to Formosa, CAT no longer had a job and was nearly insolvent. Chennault pleaded with the State Department to purchase the airline, using the argument that the company had the assets and expertise to contain China from expanding along the Pacific Rim. The CIA wanted to use the air transportation assets for their intelligence gathering operations in China and urged the U.S. government acquisition. The argument fell on deaf ears. The State Department did not want clear ownership of a Chinese company. So the CIA devised a plan for indirect ownership and suggest a U.S. government-owned corporation in Delaware that would create a subsidiary which in turn would purchase a portion of Civil Air Transport and thus disguise the real owner. The State Department agreed and incorporated the slightly misspelled Airedale, Inc. as the holding company. The subsidiary was named CAT, Inc., which in turn purchased 40% of Civil Air Transport. Chinese investors held 60%. CAT, Inc. created a wholly owned Republic of China company called Asiatic Aeronautical Company Limited, and all of the hard assets transferred to that company. The pilots, mechanics, and staff personnel moved to CAT, Inc. Civil Air Transport became the flag carrier of the Republic of China, hauling people and freight all over Southeast Asia. Southern Air Transport was a Florida corporation touted as a CIA front company, but it too was owned by the U.S. government. Further confusing the ownership issue, SAT had two divisions, SAT Atlantic and SAT Pacific, but only one operating certificate. Employees of SAT Atlantic would not interact with SAT Pacific, and all of the employees of SAT Pacific were on the same seniority list with CAT Inc. employees. Initially, the CIA was charged with the responsibility of operating CAT Inc., but they soon realized they did not have enough work to keep the airline afloat. The U.S. government funding would require congressional approval and reveal the government's ownership. It was decided to allow the company to act as if it was a private enterprise and bid on government contracts. At that point, the project became an ongoing operation, but no one considered the plight of the employees. The U.S. government owned the company, and the employees worked directly for the enterprise. The government never revealed the real owner to the employees. Some were told the CIA owned the company, and a scant few worked directly for the CIA, but the CIA is part of the U.S. government and doesn't own anything. Therefore, the government could not enroll the employees into the Civil Service Retirement Program because that too would reveal the real owner, and couldn't issue personnel service agreements because technically the workers were not contracted employees. As a result, the employees of SAT Pacific, CAT Inc., and Asiatic Aeronautical and Civil Air Transport, all seemingly separate companies, but actually one and the same, were, being neither fish nor fowl, left dangling and officially unrecognized. I'm going to stop with the history of Air America here. The key thing to remember from this episode is that the U.S. government did not want to claim the employees of this airline as government employees. They were left dangling and officially unrecognized. That's all going to lead up to why they are trying to pass this legislation today, to correct the results of a lying government. In the next episode, we will continue looking at this tangled web of deceit woven by a government not willing to admit what it was doing. It's going to be very interesting, so do not miss the next episode of this podcast. This is Mac Payne closing out episode 1827 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. You are cordially invited to return again soon and often to listen to more that will be coming your way on this podcast, the Vietnam Veteran News.
How about that? Ain't that a mess?